Eggs, Day 4, Chapter 17. John noticed that Primrose's photo father was drawing increasing attention from the boy. They would be watching a crime movie, for example, and the boy would say, "Hey, maybe he's a private eye." It went on like that. Maybe he's an astronaut, maybe he's a cowboy, maybe he's a salesman, like my dad. Primrose's usual response was a smirk, though John could tell she liked some of his ideas. As for the boy, he was perfectly serious and obviously thought he was being helpful. Then his speculations became more immediate. He would see a sports announcer on TV, or a game show host, or a chef. "Hey, maybe that's him." Primrose would groan and say, "He doesn't look anything like that," and the boy would hold his ground, and they would debate the whole thing, and sooner or later Primrose would whip out the pocket-sized picture and slam it next to the face on the TV screen and growl, "There, stupid. Does it look like him now?" As disgusted as she appeared to be, she was always ready to jump back into it the next time the boy said, "Hey, maybe," for, however unintentionally, he was goading her to do one of her favorite things, talk about her father. Then he got silly. During a show about a circus, he pointed to a preposterous-looking clown and said it. This time Primrose's anger was real. She ground her words into his face. "He's not a clown." The boy did not debate the point. The following night, they didn't show up till after 11. Primrose went straight for the remote and turned on the TV. The kids were groaning because channel after channel was news, when suddenly John shouted, "Stop! Hold it there!" He pulled up closer. "I'll be darned. It's the waving man." "What?" said Primrose, but John's flapping hand quieted her as he focused intently on the screen. Channel 10 News was showing a shabby-looking man in a scraggly gray beard and baggy pants standing on the corner of a busy intersection, waving, smiling and waving. When the news went on to something else, John told them, "That was the waving man. I saw him myself in the city a couple times." "What's he waving at?" said David. "The people driving by," said John. "He stands there every day during rush hour, waving at the cars. He waved at me once." "He does it every day?" "Far as I know." "All year long? Even in the winter, when it's 20 degrees below zero?" John nodded. "Always." Primrose, who had been listening with increasing disbelief, said, "Why?" John faced her. "Why does he wave?" "Yeah, why?" John looked at the ceiling and shrugged. "I don't know." "Is he nutso?" "No, I don't think so." "So why does he do it?" John sighed in surrender. "Who knows? Maybe he's just friendly." "That's stupid," she said. "I think he's just nutso. Like my mother." "Your mother isn't nutso," said John. "She's just a little different." Primrose snorted. "Ha, a little? Try living with her." David said, "Hey, maybe the waving man will wave at you someday, Primrose sneered. "Let him try it." And then the boy said, "Hey, maybe he's your dad." The girl was on him in a flash, pinning him on the sofa, mashing his face into the cushion. John rushed over and pulled her off. She flailed in his arms, still wanting to attack. The boy was crying. The girl was screaming, "My father's not a bum on the street. Don't ever mention my father again." The boy screamed back, wet-faced and red, "I hate you and your stupid, crazy mother." "At least my mother's alive." For a moment, the boy looked like he'd been poleaxed. But he recovered and picked up the TV remote and threw it. It would have hit her in the face if John had not blocked it with his forearm. This was different. This was ugly. He shook the girl by the shoulders and thundered at them both. "Knock it off." Shocked, they fell quiet at once. Now what? He thought. He had zero experience in controlling and disciplining children. He had to say something, keep talking, divert them from each other. So he did the first thing that came to mind. He told them about the night crawlers. Chapter 18. The girl was still $20 short on her paint fund. Much of what she made at the flea market each Saturday she spent the following week on lunch for herself and the boy. She was a go-getting earner, but not a great saver. She had been pestering Refrigerator John for more ways to earn money, and that's why night crawlers came to mind as he banished the kids to opposite sides of the living room. He let them fire a few more "I hate yous" at each other, ordered them to shut up, and told them he had been thinking about opening a bait shop. "A lot of people fish in the river around here, you know. Get me some minis and worms, clear off the shelf in the corner of the workshop, nail up a sign. All I need is somebody to catch the bait." He looked at one, then the other. The boy sniffed. "You mean us?" John nodded. "How much?" said Primrose. John thought, "Well, let's see. Regular worms are small and easy to catch, maybe a nickel apiece. Minis are too small, but harder to catch, 10 or 15 cents. But what I'm really going to need are night crawlers, big and hard to catch." He thought some more. "Say 20 cents each." "What's a night crawler?" said the boy. "A worm." "Worm," sneered Primrose. "A big worm," said John. "I've seen him a foot long." The boy gasped. "Wow." His face was returning to its normal color. He put his palms together and drew them apart till the space between them seemed like a foot to him. "Wow." "They only come out at night," said John, especially after a good rain. And there's a special way to catch them. If you do, somebody's got himself a fat catfish. Quarter apiece, said the girl, always turning the screw. John gazed thoughtfully at the ceiling. He nodded. Okay. Does that go for me too? Said the boy. If I catch a night crawler, do I get a quarter? Sure do, said John. Business is business. The boy clapped. All right. When the kids came by next day, John was ready with 2 flashlights. Each had a piece of red balloon stretched over the lens and secured by a rubber band. Let's go outside, he said. Time for school. He led them into the sun-bright wheat field that bordered much of Tulip Street. He stopped and stood for a minute, saying nothing. He grinned at the boy. Feeling anything? The boy was puzzled. No. John chuckled. Just kidding. He pointed to the ground. They're down there, just a couple inches under your shoes. The boy looked down and gave a visible shudder. Primrose snickered. The thing about night crawlers is, John said, you can't feel them, but they can feel you. Leastways, when you're walking regularly, they can. Right now, they can't, because we're still. So here's the first thing you gotta do. He got down on his hands and knees, his bad legs splayed outward. You gotta crawl along real slow and easy and quiet. His voice dropped to a whisper. No talking. Signal with your hands or the lights. The boy was on his own hands and knees beside him. Got it? The boy nodded. Got it. John squinted up with Primrose. Okay. Now, second thing about night crawlers is they're real sensitive to light. They don't like it. Look here. He twisted his forefinger into the dirt until he had drilled a half-inch hole. The crawler comes up out of his hole except for one thing, his tail. The rest of him is laying out on the ground, maybe all 12 inches of him, but his tail is still in there. He looked at David. Know why? Primrose answered. Quick getaway. John jabbed his thumb up. That's right. If he sees your light, he made a worm down the hole sound. He's gone. He took the boy's flashlight. He held it before his eyes, but that's only if it's regular light. You see, the thing about night crawlers is, he flicked the switch. The rubber circle brightened. They can't see red light. His eyes met theirs. The boy whispered, Wow! Primrose said nothing, but was clearly impressed. He went through the whole routine then, crawling, shining the red light, grabbing the worm at the burrow entrance. Grab her between your fingers and hold her tight, he said. You won't be able to pull her out right away because the crawler digs into the sides of the hole and hangs on. They can be stubborn buggers. The boy laughed. Stubborn buggers. Yep. But be patient. Sooner or later, she'll relax and you can pull her out. How do you know it's a girl? Said the boy. Primrose thumped him. It's just a saying, dummy. She turned to John. How do you know all this? John pushed heavily off his good leg and got himself upright. Used to hunt them myself before I got into appliances. They walked back to the abode. Primrose said, I'm not touching those things without gloves. Me neither, said the boy. 2 days later, it rained. Chapter 19. They left John's abode at precisely 10 o'clock that night, each with a flashlight, a pair of gardening gloves, and a plastic jug. The jugs were capped and hung from ropes that had been threaded through the jug handles and tied around their waists. Primrose also wore John's watch. John stood in the doorway as they headed down Tulip. 11 o'clock, you hear? Well, I'm coming. Don't wait up, Primrose sang. I'm not kidding, Missy. I heard you. The rain had stopped hours before, yet the night could not forget. A fine mist kissed their faces. The fields crackled around them and bloomed cool scents of weed and wet earth. There was neither moon nor street light, only a pair of tiny fallen red planets bouncing along in utter blackness. Can't even see my house down here, said Primrose. Can't see anything, said David. He pinched the back of her shirt, held on. Okay, now, she said. John had told them to go about halfway and turn left. They entered the weeds. As summer went on, David had stopped being afraid of the night. Of course, he never had been scared in Refrigerator John's or under the bright lights of the supermarket or 7-Eleven. But even on the streets, the occasional pools of light, the hum of the wagon wheels or his own bike or Primrose's skates, the warm yellow rectangles of neighborhood windows, the very firmness of the pavement beneath his feet, he had come to feel at ease. This was different. This was the first time they had left the street, the first time in such total darkness that David, looking ahead, could see no difference between earth and sky. The red smudges given by the cat's flashlights might be good for hunting worms, but they gave little comfort to a 9-year-old human. The mushy, musky ground, the wet weeds hugging his legs, it was like walking blindfolded through a swamp. Creepy. A moment came to him from long ago. He was walking down a dark hallway behind his mother, her hand trailing for him to hold. Don't let go, Davy, she was saying. Electricity went off, that's all. He held on tight. He wished Primrose would say something. He crooked his fingers through a belt loop on her jeans. We're not breaking the law, are we? He said. What law? I don't know, I'm asking you. She took her time replying. Well, there is one law I can think of that we might be breaking. Maybe even 2. What's that? Hunting laws. See, there's 2 things. First, you need a license, like to hunt deer and stuff, you know. Yeah, and we don't have one. But these are worms. Big worms. He wished she hadn't reminded him. A particularly tall weed slid wetly across his arm. At least he hoped it was a weed. He crooked another finger into the belt loop. Think we have to turn back? Wait a minute, I'm not done. The second thing is hunting season. Like, you can't go around hunting whenever you want all year round, you know? No. Heck no. You want to hunt for deer? There's a special season. Bears? Special season. Pheasants? Special season. Worms? She shone the red light in his face. Special season? She poked him. Brilliant. So this is worm hunting season? We missed it. It ended in June. Oh. David pulled Primrose to a stop by her belt loop. Then I guess we have to go back, don't we? Heavy on his mind was his vow never to break a rule. Primrose scoffed and dragged him along. Nah, we're okay as long as the worm warden doesn't catch us. Worm warden? Yeah, he's like a policeman for hunters. He throws you in jail if he catches you hunting in the wrong season. David stopped her again. Primrose, we can't. She pulled him onward. Don't be such a geek. The warden doesn't care about a couple of kids. He's out looking for big-time worm rustlers. He let go of her. He screeched, I'm not going to break the law. There was silence. Then Primrose exploded with laughter that sent every worm along April Street thumping back into its hole. And David knew he had been tricked again. A kick to Primrose's leg did nothing to stem the laughter. At last she settled down. Oh, jeez, she wiped her eyes. You are so dumb. You must take a dumb pill every morning. You believe everything I say. When she shone her red light into David's scowling face, she broke out again. David turned to go back. She caught him by the collar. Okay. She took a deep breath. No more messing around. We got to get serious. Another deep breath. Come on. He followed her into the blackness. Chapter 20. Primrose came to a halt. Turning the dim light on herself, she put a finger to her lips. She drew gloves from her pocket and pulled them on. So did David. She pointed to the ground and got down on her hands and knees. David, with a faint shudder, did likewise. They began crawling. Wet blood-red stalks came at David like a nightmare, bumping his nose and slipping across his cheeks. Damp leaves licked his ears. The sod soaked straight through his knuckles and his knees. He hated worm hunting. As instructed by Refrigerator John, they crawled in the same direction, side by side. Whatever worms showed up in their paths were theirs. The chirruping of 100 unseen crickets masked their own rustle. They had barely begun when Primrose pounced. She held her hand. David's red beam revealed 2 inches of a wiggle dangling from her gloved fingertips. An ordinary worm. She dumped it into her jug, and in front of a proud grin held up 5 fingers, a nickel for her. Then David saw one, another 2-incher. He picked it up and dangled it in her face and stuck out his tongue, into the jug, a nickel for him. For the next several minutes, they both collected a good handful of worms, all of them 2 and 3 inchers. David kept tabs on his growing wealth, 20 cents, 25, 30. He could now understand the profit in night crawlers, 25 cents in one swoop, 4 and he had $1. But where were they? Refrigerator John had said they would be all over the place. He was about to pick up another 2-incher when his eye caught movement at the hazy edge of the light. He looked and yelped, Snake! As he leaped onto Primrose's back. Primrose jumped to her feet to shed him, but he clung like a saddle, his arms around her neck, legs around her waist. She peeled him off, growling, That was no snake, dummy. That was a night crawler. I saw it go back in its hole. She smacked his shoulder. And that's probably where they all went by now, you baby big mouth. Her fist shook in front of his nose. If you punch me, I'm calling 911. If I punch you, you won't be able to talk for a week. I never should have brought you along. I'm never going to get my pain at this rate. She abruptly stomped off in another direction. David hurried after her. Hey, don't lose me. She whirled. She squeezed his shoulders. She shone her light in her eyes. Are you going to keep your mouth shut? Yes. Are you going to make me mad again? No. She shone the light on the watch. Half an hour left. Crap. She dropped to her hands and knees and started crawling. David fell in beside her. Within seconds, Primrose had stopped and signaled David to halt. 5 feet ahead of her, lying flat across the ground, as easy as you please, was the longest worm David had ever seen. And that wasn't even all of it. One end was still in the hole. He stayed rock still and held his breath while Primrose did as instructed, creeping ever closer, holding the light steady, till now. She clamped it at its tail at the hole and held on. The monster worm flailed about for a good minute before Primrose was able to pull it free. With both hands, she held it out full length. It looked as long as a school ruler and as fat as a man's thumb. She poured it into her jug and flashed 5 fingers 5 times, 25 cents. David started crawling and was promptly rewarded with a long, fat one in his own path. In his haste, he moved too fast, jerked the flashlight, and the worm was gone. Primrose made a mocking snort. David stuck out his tongue and pushed on. He'd show her. The next night crawler he came to, he did it right. Slow, silent, clamped the tail. Yes, he had it. It looked longer than hers, maybe a world record. He reached over and waggled it in her face, dumped it into his own jug, and paused to calculate. Counting the 2-inchers, he was up to 55 cents now. He plowed on, ignoring weeds and wet, spreading the 2-inch ruts, flicking them aside. Ruts. He was going for a big game now. There was one. Got it. There. Got it. Compared to Easter eggs, worms were a snap. They were still following parallel paths, but they were no longer side by side. When one stopped to nab a worm, the other moved ahead. It was a race. Quarter by quarter, David's total rose. Unlike Primrose, he had nothing in particular in mind to spend his money on. He just loved the idea of accumulating it. If there were so many night crawlers in this small area, think how many there were all up and down Tulip Street. He could make $1,000,000. He was up to $3.60 when he spotted the next victim, a fat 10-incher up ahead and a little to the left. Closing in slowly on his prey, he pounced on one end, just as another gloved hand, Primrose's, snatched the other end. They lifted together, the worm like a short, slick jump rope between them. Let go, hissed Primrose. You let go, hissed David. I saw it first, growled Primrose. I did, growled David. Primrose pulled. David pulled. The 10-inch worm became an 11-incher. I need the money, snarled Primrose. So do I, snarled David. I'll spit on you if you don't let go, screeched Primrose. I'll spit on you, screeched David. They stood. Primrose pulled. David pulled. 12 inches. It's mine, roared Primrose. It's mine, roared David. She pulled. He pulled. Flunk. Each now held 6 inches of flailing nightcrawler. See what you did, yelled Primrose. She smacked David with her half. David threw his half at her. You did it. You're greedy. It was my worm and you took it. With the hand speed of a yo-yo ace, David flipped the lid off Primrose's jug, turned it all over, and shook it. By the time Primrose reclaimed the jug, a half dozen 10-inchers were on the ground, calling back into the night. In the beam from David's flashlight, her eyes burned like demons. She stepped toward him. He backed up. She was about to take another step, but halted. She smiled evilly. She held her flashlight before him. Take a good look, she said. As David stared, he was impressed by the perfect red roundness of the disc. He wondered why worms couldn't see it. Primrose's voice, seeming to come from the red disc, said liltily, Have a nice night, and the light went out. David raised his own light, pointed it. She was moving off, reduced already to a shoulder and a jog rope at the dissolving limit of the red beam. He tore off the rubber cap and jabbed the fresh light outward. She was gone. He heard a rustle. There? There? His light showed only weeds and night. Chapter 21. The clock on the wall said 10:55 when Refrigerator John heard the screams. A moment later, he was lurching down Tulip, cursing his bad leg. He veered into the weeds, the beam of his flashlight probing the night, homing in on the shrill cries. He found the boy screaming with his eyes shut and his flashlight thrust upward, its pitiful beam vanishing mere inches above his head in the black vastness. David! John barked and took hold of him impossibly. The screaming got louder. The boy fought, flailed his flashlight. Only when John pinned his arms and gathered him in and smothered him to his own body did the boy release his terror and sob, Mommy, Mommy, into his chest. The boy clung to him with surprising strength. John held him there until the sobbing and trembling ceased. Fearfully, then, having no idea what had happened, he called out Primrose's name. He prayed he would not have to call a second time. A sniffle in the dark, a rustling to the right, and his answer prayer walked into the light. Her glistening, gaping eyes, the hunched stiffness of her shoulders, and the cold terror on her face told him no reproach was needed. A lesson had been learned. On the way back to the abode, the boy told what had happened. John marveled that such combat could result from a broken worm. He told them now what he should have told them before. When a nightcrawler splits, he said, the head end grows a new tail, and the tail end grows a new head. And there you go, 2 new worms. The boy went, wow! 15 minutes later, they were sipping hot chocolate. The boy had suggested it. Primrose's response in July was more reflexive than a protest, and it turned out the boy was right. Hot chocolate was perfect for the moment. 30 minutes later, the kids were squabbling over the TV. Refrigerator John was sat back and relaxed. And found reassurance in their return to the usual bickering. He suspected it no accident, that some instinct beyond their years was driving them onto safe, familiar ground. An hour later, the boy was braiding her hair, and she was grousing because he was pulling too hard.